March 27th, 1977. What began as a routine day turned into the deadliest aviation disaster in history. Two Boeing 747s, KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736 collided on the runway at Los Rodeos Airport in dense fog. In just moments, 583 lives were lost. This is the Tenerife disaster. Earlier that day, a bomb threat at Las Palmas Gran Canaria Airport forced multiple diversions to the small, ill-equipped Los Rodeos Airport. This airport's single runway and minimal infrastructure had no parallel taxiways, which led to a traffic jam of massive aircraft. As darkness settled and fog rolled in, visibility plunged. Pilots and the control tower relied entirely on radio. A garbled instruction combined with cross transmissions created fatal confusion. Multiple voices overlapped, and amidst it all, control clearance blurred with a zoom permission. Meanwhile, Pan Am was still on the runway, and KLM began its takeoff roll. At 17:06, KLM began its takeoff roll. Just meters ahead was Pan Am still on the runway. The impact tore through Pan Am's fuselage, and both planes erupted in a fiery inferno. All 248 people on board KLM perished, and Pan Am only saw 335 fatalities. Only 61 survived, many escaping through a ruptured fuselage near the wing. But how did we really get here, having two Boeing 747s crash into each other on a runway? So let's set the stage back in Canary Islands in 1977. It was a quiet Sunday on the Canary Islands, a popular holiday destination off the coast of Africa. Normally, Los Rodeos Airport on Tenerife was a sleepy regional airfield handling small domestic flights and the occasional international arrival. But that day, chance and tragedy would converge in ways no one could have foreseen. Earlier that afternoon, planted by the separatist group ETA exploded at Gran Canaria's Las Palmas Airport. Although no one was killed, Spanish authorities quickly shut the airport down to search for additional explosives. This single decision, routine in such circumstances, unleashed a very bad domino effect. Dozens of incoming aircraft, including two giant queens of the sky, the Boeing 747s of KLM and Pan Am, had to divert to Tenerife's Los Rodeos Airport. A small airport not designed for such heavy traffic suddenly became gridlocked with massive wide-body jets. Los Rodeos had only one runway, and a single narrow taxiway at that. Once aircraft landed, they were forced to backtrack along the runway to reach the terminal. Parking space was limited, and within an hour, jumbo jets from across Europe crowded the apron, forcing crews and controllers into an unusual, sometimes improvised procedures. Among them were KLM Flight 4805 from Amsterdam and Pan Am Flight 736 from Los Angeles by the way of New York. These two aircraft, each weighing over 300 tons fully loaded, were never meant to meet here, let alone share the same strip of tarmac in near zero visibility. KLM passengers, mainly Dutch tourists, waited on board as the crew decided to refuel at Tenerife rather than risk further delays at Las Palmas later. The refueling alone cost nearly 35 minutes. Meanwhile, 396 of the Pan Am passengers remained seated for hours, frustrated, confined, and restless. Both aircraft crews were under mounting pressure, Pan Am eager to get moving. KLM, conscious of Dutch duty hour regulations that restricted how long pilots could legally fly before resting. By late afternoon, another complication set in. A thick blanket of fog descended over Los Rodeos, a common occurrence due to its elevation and proximity to the mountains. Visibility, already limited, dropped to a few hundred meters. Controllers in the small tower could barely see the runway. Pilots in the cockpit could not see each other's aircraft nor the tower. Tenerife also had no ground radar to track aircraft movement. Communication would now rely entirely on voice through radio transmissions, already crackling with static and overlapping signals. Shortly after 5 p.m., the weather closed in. Pan Am received instructions to taxi along the runway and to exit at the third taxiway, and then circle around to the terminal for departure. At the same time, KLM was instructed to taxi down the same runway, make a 180-degree turn at the far end, and then position itself for takeoff. But the taxiways at Los Rodeos were poorly marked, narrow and at odd angles. In the fog, Pan Am's crew struggled to find their designated exit. They missed the first two runoffs, searching for the third. The KLM, meanwhile, reached the runway threshold, turned around, and waited, its engines already spooling and its captain eager to depart. Now, inside KLM's cockpit sat Captain Jacob Van Santen, one of the airline's most experienced and respected pilots, a training captain and the face of KLM's advertising campaigns at the time. And because of the high regard that he was kept to, he was always pressured to maintain a schedule. And because of the delays, he was becoming impatient. The co-pilot and flight engineer voiced caution, but hierarchy in the cockpit culture of the 1970s meant that challenging the captain outright was very rare. Radio transmissions grew increasingly confusing. Controllers' instructions overlapped with Pan Am's position reports. Words like OK, stand by, and you are cleared fill the airways. But the messages weren't always clear who they were meant for. At 5:06 p.m., the fog was at its thickest. The Pan Am Jumbo was still lumbering down the runway, searching for its exit. The KLM, now fully loaded with fuel, sat at the far end, poised for takeoff. A garbled transmission from the tower, and Pan Am was misheard by the KLM crew. The captain believed he had clearance. His co-pilot, hesitant, attempted to clarify, but Van Zeten's authority was absolute. He pushed the throttles forward. The runway, choked in fog, now held two aircraft of unprecedented size, hurtling toward the inevitable. Two 747s carrying nearly 650 people now found themselves lined up on the same fog-covered runway, a single strip of asphalt, one preparing to depart and the other taxiing straight towards it. The stage was set for disaster unlike anything aviation had ever seen. The nose of KLM Flight 4805 sliced into Pan Am 736. In an instant, the Dutch jumbo jet undercarriage ripped open the upper fuselage of the Pan Am aircraft. The sound was like an explosion, twisting metal, breaking glass, and the sudden roar of igniting jet fuel. The Pan Am jet was torn apart, the roof split open, flames shot through the cabin, and hundreds of passengers were thrown into chaos. Many were unfortunately unalived instantly in the forward section. For those still alive, the cabin filled with black smoke so quickly that visibility dropped to almost nothing. Passengers clawed their way toward the light, toward holes ripped in the fuselage. Some were leaping to the tarmac below in desperation. Out of nearly 400 on board, just 61 souls would make it out alive. The KLM aircraft, still carrying a full load of fuel for its journey back to Amsterdam, briefly lifted after the collision, before slamming back down onto the runway. What followed was a firestorm. The explosion consumed the jet in seconds. All 240 passengers and crew aboard perished, trapped in an inferno no human could survive. Emergency services rushed to the scene. But Los Rodeos was utterly unprepared for disaster of this scale. Fire trucks and ambulances were too few, their access slowed down by the cars that had clogged the airport roads during the earlier bomb scare. The flames, fed by thousands of gallons of jet fuel, were so intense that rescuers could barely approach. In a matter of minutes, Both aircrafts, once symbols of modern aviation, were reduced to burning wrecks. What had begun as a day of diversions, delays, and fog ended in the deadliest accident in aviation history. One survivor said, "We all settled back, and the next thing, an explosion took place and the whole port side was just torn open." Investigators from Spain, the Netherlands, and the United States descended on Tenerife. What they faced was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Two Boeing 747s reduced to twisted wreckage, scattered across the runway in dense fog. The blackened debris field stretched hundreds of meters, and the acrid smell of fuel and smoke lingered for days. The first task was grim, recovering the flight recorders, or the black boxes. On the Pan Am jet, the cockpit voice recorder revealed that the frantic last word of the crews as they spotted the KLM aircraft at the final moment. "There he is," followed by the impact. The KLM recorder, however, revealed something even more chilling. Captain Jacob's calm yet mistaken belief that he had been cleared for takeoff. His confident voice contrasted sharply with the confusion echoing through the radio frequencies. Investigators quickly uncovered a critical factor: radio communication problems. Because Los Rodeos Airport had only one radio frequency for ground and air traffic, multiple transmissions overlapped. And at one point, the Pan Am crew and air traffic control both responded to the KLM's cockpit at the same time. This resulted in what's called heterodyning, a distortion that canceled parts of the message. To the KLM crew, it sounded as if they had been cleared for takeoff, but in reality, no such clearance had been given. Additionally, the weather played its part too. The thick, shifting fog that had blanketed the runway reduced visibility to almost nothing. Neither crew could see the other until it was far too late. At one point, Pan Am's captain asked for confirmation about taxiing, but the fog and the poor airport signage made navigation nearly impossible. Even seasoned pilots found the runway layout confusing under these conditions. The investigation also highlighted human factors. Captain Van Zanten wasn't just any pilot. He was KLM's chief flight instructor, the face of the airline's training program. He even featured in advertisements as the epitome of professionalism. His reputation made it nearly impossible for his first officer or flight engineer to openly challenge him. When the flight engineer timidly suggested that the Pan Am might still be on the runway, Van Zanten dismissed it. And seconds later, the disaster unfolded. This exposed a dangerous truth. The airline culture at the time was deeply hierarchical, often preventing junior crews from speaking up. The real report painted a complex picture. The KLM's captain's premature takeoff was identified as a direct cause. But investigators emphasized that the chain of circumstances that set the stage, the bomb threat in Gran Canaria, the sudden diversion to Tenerife, the crowded single runway airport, the thick fog, the radio interference, and the lack of clear ground radar. However, the tragedy wasn't in vain. Out of this catastrophe came sweeping changes to aviation safety. The concept of crew resource management, otherwise known as CRM, was born. A new training philosophy that encouraged open communication, teamwork, and the ability for any crew member, no matter their rank, to question a captain's decision if safety was at stake. Today, CRM is standard across airlines worldwide. Airports too learned their lessons. Runway markings and signage were standardized. Ground radar was installed at major airports, and stricter international phraseology was introduced in aviation. Communication to reduce ambiguity. Pilots were trained to never use casual phrases like "we are at takeoff," but instead speak standardized terms. The Tenerife investigation, though devastating, reshaped aviation forever. The lessons learned from those smoldering wrecks still echo in every cockpit and control tower to this day. On March 27, 2007, 30 years later, a memorial was erected atop Mesa Mota, an 18-meter spiral staircase titled The Stairway to Heaven by Rudy van de Wind. It is an endless ascent cut short, symbolizes the lives interrupted yet seeking peace. Tenerife's tragedy remains a solemn testament to the cost of miscommunication. But through loss, aviation grew safer, evolving with empathy, precision, and teamwork. We remember the 583 lives lost not just with sorrow, but with a commitment to vigilance in every flight. May the memory guide us to clearer skies. Thank you all so much for watching. This is my first video about an aircraft investigation. I am not entirely sure how this video turns out because as I'm recording this right now, I have no idea how the edit is going to look, but I hope it goes well. If you guys want to see more videos like this, or if you have suggestions about how you want me to cover these topics, please let me know in the comment section down below. Also, let me know if there are any other aircraft investigations, building disasters, true crime, or anything of the such you want me to cover. Just leave it in the comment section down below and I will do my best to research about it and make a script. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Again, stay safe. And I'll see you all in the next video. On June 29th, 1995, a 5-story shopping mall in the heart of Seoul is packed with shoppers, employees, and families. But beneath its polished floors are fatal cracks, ignored warnings of an impending catastrophe. At 5:52 p.m., the unthinkable happens. In just 20 seconds, the entire building collapses, trapping over 1,500 people inside. This was no earthquake, however, no explosion. The Sampong department store disaster was entirely man-made, the result of greed, negligence, and a series of ignored red flags. The engineers saw the danger, warnings were dismissed, and in the end, over 500 people paid the price. What really led to one of the world's deadliest structural failures in modern history, and could it have been prevented? This is the story of the Sampong Mall disaster. In the events leading up to the 1988 Summer Olympics, there was a large development boom in the Seoul capital area. Because of bans against international construction contractors signing contracts for projects in Seoul at the time, almost all buildings were being erected by South Korean companies, which typically built the structures quickly because of the large number of projects assigned to them. The Sampong Group began constructing the Sampong department store in 1987 over a tract of land in the Secho district, previously used as a landfill. The building's plans originally called for a residential apartment building with 4 floors to be built by Woo-Sung Construction. However, during construction, the blueprints were changed by the future chairman of Sampong Group's construction division, Lee Jun, to instead create a large department store. This involved cutting away a number of support columns to install escalators and the addition of a 5th floor, originally meant as a roller skating rink but was later changed to a food court. Woo-Sung refused to carry out these changes due to serious structural concerns. In response, Lee Jun fired them and used his own company to complete the store's construction instead. The building was completed in late 1989 and the department store opened to the public on July 7, 1990, attracting an estimated 40,000 people per day during the building's 5 years of existence. The completed building was a flat slab structure without cross beams or a steel skeleton, which effectively meant there was no way to transfer the load across the floors. To maximize the floor space, Lee Jun ordered the floor columns to be reduced to be 60 centimeters in thickness instead of the minimum 80 centimeter thickness in the original blueprint that was required for the building to stand safely, and the columns were spaced 11 meters apart to maximize retail space. A decision that meant that there was more load on each column than there would have been if the columns had been closer together. The 5th-story restaurant had a heated concrete base referred to as an ondol. The presence of this greatly increased the weight and thickness of the slab, further burdening the already weakened supports. The store's 3 15-ton air conditioning units were also installed on the roof, leading to a greater structural strain. The air conditioning was also exceedingly loud and led to noise complaints by customers. As a result of the complaints, in 1993, the air conditioning units were dragged across the overloaded roof, resulting in cracking. The units are moved over column 5E, where the most visible cracks in the 5th floor were seen before the collapse. The cracks in the columns worsened because the columns supporting the 5th floor were not aligned with the ones supporting the lower floors, thus causing the load on the 5th floor to be transferred directly through the slab. In April 1995, cracks began to appear in the ceiling of the 5th floor in the south wing, but the only response by Lee Jun and staff management was to move merchandise and stores from the top floor to the basement. On the morning of June 29th, the number of cracks in the area had increased dramatically, prompting store management to close parts of the top floor. However, the management failed to shut the building down or issue formal evacuation orders, as the number of customers in the building at the time was unusually high and the management did not want to lose a day's revenue. When civil engineering experts were invited to inspect the structure, a cursory check revealed that the building was at risk of collapse. The facilities managers also examined the slab in one of the 5th floor restaurants only hours before the collapse. 5 hours before the collapse, the first of several loud bangs were heard emanating from the top floors. As the vibration of the air conditioning caused the cracks in the slabs to widen further, amid customer complaints about the vibration, the air conditioning was turned off, but the cracks in the floors had already grown to 10 centimeters wide. An emergency board meeting was held, and when it became clear the building's collapse was inevitable, the directors suggested that all of the staff and customers should be evacuated, but Lee Jun violently refused to do so over fear of revenue losses. However, Lee Jun and the executives left the building safely before the collapse occurred. At 5 p.m., as the 5th floor ceiling began to sink, store workers finally closed off all customer access to the 5th floor. 57 minutes before the collapse, the store was still packed with hundreds of shoppers, but still Lee Jun did not close the store or attempt any repairs. At about 5:52 p.m., cracking sounds could be heard and workers began to sound alarms and evacuate the building. However, it was too late. The roof gave way and the air conditioning units crashed onto the overloaded 5th floor, which then gave way. In less than 20 seconds, the building's main columns, which had already been weakened by the installation of escalators, failed, followed by all the columns in the south wing. The store's south wing then collapsed completely into the basement, killing 502 people and trapping more than 1,500 people inside. The disaster resulted in property damage totaling about 270 billion won, approximately $206 million. Rescue crews were on the scene within minutes of the disaster, with cranes and other heavy equipment being brought in the next day. However, Seoul's mayor, Choi Pyong-yeol, announced the rescue efforts would be called off due to concerns that the unstable remains of the store would collapse. However, after massive protests, especially from friends and relatives of those still missing, Choi and officials agreed to continue looking for survivors, with the remains of the store being held up by guide cables. At one point, Korea Telecom was transmitting a signal every half hour designed to trigger cell phones or pagers that the trapped survivors might be carrying. After nearly a week, the focus was on removing the debris, but construction crews continued to search for victims. However, 2 weeks after the collapse, city officials concluded that anybody who was still in the building must have already died. Therefore, further efforts will only be made towards recovery and not rescue. Despite the sweltering heat, some who were not rescued in the first few days avoided dehydration by drinking rainwater. One of the survivors recalled that other trapped survivors had drowned from the rain and from the water used for fire suppression. During his interrogation with Professor Chung, Lee Jun sparked further controversy by saying that his main concern was that the collapse of the store not only harmed the customers but also inflicted great financial damage to his company. On December 27, 1995, Lee Jun was found guilty of criminal negligence and received a prison sentence of 10.5 years. Prosecutors originally asked for Lee Jun's sentence of 20 years but was reduced to 7.5 years on appeal. Lee Jun later died on October 4, 2003, months after his release from prison, of complications from diabetes, high blood pressure, and kidney disease. Lee Jun's son and the store CEO, Lee Han-sung, received 7 years for accidental homicide and corruption. Following his release from prison in 2002, Lee Han-sang worked as an evangelist in Mongolia. City official Lee Chung-woo, who was the chief administrator of the area where the store was located, was sentenced to 3 years in jail for bribery. Hwang Chol-min, a former chief for the area, was found guilty of accepting a 12 million won bribe from Lee Jun and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Other participating officials, including a former chief administrator of the Secho district, were also jailed. Other parties sentenced included a number of the store executives and the company responsible for completing the building. At first, the families of the victims were asking for an average of $250,000 each. However, the city of Seoul, representing the store's owners, offered to pay $220,000 for each victim, arguing that they could not afford to pay more. 2 months after the collapse, Lee Jun and Lee Han-sang submitted a jointly signed memo to Seoul, offering their entire wealth to compensate the families of the victims. As a result, the Sampong Group ceased to exist. The remains of the store were demolished shortly after the collapse and the recovery operations. The site remained vacant until 2000. The families of the victims requested that a memorial be built on the site, but it was opposed by the Secho district government, forcing the Seoul metropolitan government to mediate the dispute. In a controversial move, the memorial was built elsewhere and the land was sold off to a private developer. The site of the collapse is now home to a luxury apartment complex, Aquavista Apartments, whose constructions began in 2001 and was completed in 2004. The Yangjae Citizens Forest has a sculpture made in memory of the collapse. The 12-meter high marble memorial was funded by the Sampong Group as compensation to the victims. As we remember this tragedy, we must also commit to preventing such disasters in the future. The legacy of the Sampong department store collapse is a call to action for better safety standards, corporate responsibility, and respect for human life. Thank you all for watching. If you found this video informative, please like and subscribe for more content. Let's learn from the past to build a safer future. What if I told you one of the deadliest US transportation accidents in nearly 2 decades didn't happen on a plane or a train, but inside a limousine that never should have been on the road in the first place? On October 6, 2018, in the quiet town of Schoharie, New York, a stretch limousine barreled through a stop sign and crashed, killing 20 people. What should have been a happy celebration for a birthday turned into one of the worst nights for their families. And behind it all, a disturbing trail of ignored warnings, shady businesses, and a system that failed at every turn. The crash was, at the time, the deadliest transportation-related disaster in the United States since the 2009 KLM Air Flight 3407, which crashed near Buffalo, killing 50 people. In this video, we're diving deep into this Schoharie limousine crash. How it happened, why it was preventable, and the shocking truths that were uncovered in the aftermath. Stick with me because this story is about way more than just one tragic day. It's about a ticking time bomb no one bothered to defuse. Background: Axel and his wife Amy had planned an outing with their family and close friends at a brewery to celebrate Amy's 30th birthday. Axel arranged for a party bus to provide transport. That morning, the group, aged between 24 to 34, gathered at Axel's home. This included all 3 of Amy's sisters, 2 of their husbands, and Axel's brother. The party had a noon reservation at the brewery, but that morning, Axel learned that the bus had broken down, and he arranged transportation through another company called Prestige Limousine Services. Prestige sent a stretch limousine, a 2001 Ford Excursions with a capacity of 18 people. The driver of that limo, Scott, had complained about the safety of the company's vehicles. His wife recalled overhearing him on the phone when the company called with an assignment, complaining that he would not drive that particular vehicle and requesting another one. As a former truck driver, he had held a valid commercial driving license but lacked the actual requirements required for transport of 15 or more passengers. Scott had been cited for driving without this endorsement. Due to this outstanding on his license, it should have been suspended, but due to a clerical error, this had not been done. A couple who had rented out the excursion a year earlier said that the driver drove erratically, making dangerous maneuvers such as backing up on a busy road to make a turn he had missed. And at the time of the crash, the driver was not listed on the Limousine's insurance policy as a driver. Additionally, toxicology tests revealed that the driver had significant amounts of marijuana and traces of anti-seizure medication in his system when he died. The owner of an Albany limousine company that sold Prestige the Excursion in 2016 claimed it had been in good working order at the time and had passed its last inspection. However, a driver from another company that shared limousines with Prestige said that he had driven the Excursion in 2015 and it was absolutely unsafe. The brakes barely worked, and when the vehicle had begun smoking during a ride, the children's parents refused to let them ride in it. The driver claimed that the operators performed only minimal maintenance work. After leaving the company, he reported the vehicle to the state. A couple who rented the vehicle a year before the crash claimed that it was in poor condition and had an unusually loud engine. Prestige driver James Patcher said that he refused to drive the Excursion for 18 months leading up to the crash due to its inadequate brakes. 2 days before the crash, the limousine was listed for sale with an asking price of $9,000. The seller claimed it was DOT ready and was in excellent condition, with 180,000 miles on it, which is approximately 290,000 kilometers. The seller was not explicitly identified, but the phone number was one that Prestige had used. A victim texted a relative shortly before the crash with concerns about the vehicle's conditions, calling it a junker and saying that the engine was unusually loud. 3 minutes later, another victim texted her fiancé that the brakes were burning and that the vehicle was coasting. The Excursion had also failed an inspection in September 2018 due to the absence of the certificate along with the mechanical problems including a perpetually lit anti-lock brake warning indicator light, a dangling brake line, defective emergency exits and defective windshield wipers. Hence, the limo was illegal to operate on public roads in the state until those issues were corrected. Similar issues had been found in a March spot inspection, and the Excursion had been driven 1,300 miles since then. In March, the vehicle had been cited for having 18 seats installed, in excess of its designed capacity of just 10 people. Different license plates were affixed to the limousine at its March and September inspections. The crash. Delayed by the change in vehicles, the group left Amsterdam late. The Excursion left the city and first went west on the New York State Highway, then south on New York State Route 30A, a long, winding 2-lane rural road. Why the group chose this route is not known. Investigators speculated that the stops were planned between Amsterdam and the brewery. Near Schoharie Creek, New York 30A joins the New York State Route 7, which the driver turned left to join. Several sets of signs topped by paired orange diamonds warn that trucks are not permitted on this stretch of road and advise them to use another road instead. For those drivers who continue south, many more signs warn drivers about the steep grade ahead, through which the speed limit is only 55 miles per hour, and a sign located further down that road indicates that the speed limit is reduced to just 50 miles an hour from that point on. The state's crash investigator determined that the vehicle had departed from its course, as the turn to the New York 30 junction is not the most direct route from Amsterdam to the brewery. It was speculated that the group had either changed their minds completely about the trip or had decided to stop at the Apple Barrel. Another theory is that the driver may have been lost. The occupants of a vehicle going south recalled that they had been stopped at the intersection while the Excursion turned. They described the driver's appearance as confused and frazzled, and noted that immediately after turning, the vehicle pulled over onto the shoulder and put its flashers on. They believe this occurred less than 2 minutes before the crash based on the driver's own experience of traveling the road. The witness recalled that the Excursion slowly rolled forward although its backup lights and backup beepers were on. They continued past it. A passenger in the vehicle said that they saw the driver pointing the limousine towards the valley. At the bottom of the hill is a right-angled 3-way intersection where the road forks off to the north while the other turns southward towards Schoharie. When the excursion reached the junction, it did not stop and was, according to a witness, going very fast. The witness, who had earlier seen the excursion on the side of the road, recalled that after they had stopped at the intersection, they saw the limousine coming downhill behind them, its speed increasing. They recalled that the vehicle's engine was loud, almost sounding like a jet. They feared they would be hit, but at the last second it swerved around them. The vehicle continued into the parking lot of the nearby Apple Barrel County store, where it struck a parked Toyota Highlander and came to a stop in a gully. Two pedestrians attempting to flee were struck and killed by the Highlander as it was propelled into a drainage ditch 50 feet away. All 18 people in the limousine died, with all but 2 pronounced dead at the scene. The other 2 were transported to a hospital nearby, where one was pronounced unalive on arrival, and the other was transferred by helicopter to the Albany Medical Center and pronounced unalive there. All 18 people in the limousine passed away, with all but 2 pronounced unalive at the scene. Prestige Limousines was ordered to cease and desist limousine operations until further notice. Investigations revealed that the other Prestige vehicles had also failed inspections in the past. The company's owner, Sahed Hussain, was identified as a former FBI informant in the 2009 Bronx terrorism plot. Police were unable to interview him after the crash as he had returned to his native Pakistan, reportedly for health reasons. The day after his departure, the March inspection found the limousine unserviceable. The Department of Transportation held a hearing into the Prestige's failure to maintain the vehicle on exactly a year before the crash. However, no one from Prestige attended, which could have resulted in a default fine of up to $5,000. It was said that Nauman Hussain, Sahed Hussain's son, improper registration of the excursion as a livery vehicle instead of a limousine vehicle allowed him to get the vehicle inspected under less stringent Department of Motor Vehicle standards rather than those of the Department of Transportation standards. Other limousine company operators said that the state diligently enforced its regulations and questioned how Prestige was able to continue operations. One owner said that if more than 20% of an operator's vehicles had been declared unserviceable, the state can force it to cease operations, an order only a court can override. Records show that Prestige had 80% of its vehicles unserviceable at the time of the crash. Analysts found that while the State Department of Transportation has been proactive in inspecting vehicles, it has a very poor record of following up to ensure that repairs were actually made. The limo should have never been on the road. The vehicle had been ordered off the road just weeks earlier, but Prestige Limousine ignored it. The New York State's Department of Transportation also faced harsh criticism. They had the power to shut down unsafe operators, but somehow Prestige slipped through the cracks again and again. And then there was a legal battle. Nauman Hussain, the operator, was charged with criminally negligent homicide and manslaughter. Prosecutors argued he knowingly put unsafe vehicles on the road, and after many years of legal twists and delays, in 2023 he finally pleaded guilty. However, his sentence, just 5 to 15 years in prison. Many families felt it wasn't nearly enough. The NTSB also issued a scathing final report. They concluded that the crash was caused by catastrophic brake failure due to the company's neglect and poor oversight by state regulators. Translation: this didn't have to happen. So here's the heartbreaking truth. The Schoharie limousine crash wasn't just an accident. It was a result of negligence, greed, and a system that turned a blind eye. And unfortunately, 20 innocent people paid the price. When we think of deadly crashes, we picture airplanes falling from the sky or massive train derailments. But sometimes the most dangerous ride is the one that we think is safe. The victims deserve better. Their families deserve better. And it's a stark reminder that safety only works when everyone, from companies to regulators, actually does their job. If you found this story eye-opening, stick around and watch the next video on screen right now. If you want to see more videos just like this, be sure to subscribe and like this video, and I will see you all in the next video. March 1971. In the heart of Seoul, South Korea, stood a towering symbol of modernity, the Daeyeonggak Hotel. At 22 stories tall, it was one of the highest buildings in the country at the time, a luxurious destination for locals and foreigners alike. But on one tragic morning, the pride turned into a nightmare. A fire broke out inside the hotel, spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. In a matter of minutes, thick smoke, searing flames swallowed the entire building. Guests were trapped, rescue attempts failed, and by the end of the day, 163 lives were lost. This is not just a story of a fire. This is a story of neglect, of overlooked warnings, and of a nation forced to confront the dangers hidden inside its race towards progress. Welcome to Building Disasters, and today we're uncovering the tragic story of the Daeyeonggak Hotel fire. The Daeyeonggak Hotel was more than just a hotel. It was a statement. Completed in the late 1960s, it stood in Jeonggu, Seoul, and it represented South Korea's ambition during a time of rapid economic growth. A towering structure made of concrete and steel with more than 200 rooms, modern design, and a popular rooftop restaurant with panoramic views of the capital. To many, it seemed like the future. But behind the sleek facade was a deadly flaw, a lack of proper fire safety. There were no sprinkler systems, no smoke detectors, no fire system materials, and worst of all, no dedicated fire escape staircases. Fire prevention had simply not kept up with architectural innovation. It was simply a disaster waiting to happen. On the morning of March 26, 1971, Daeyeonggak Hotel was bustling with activity. Guests were waking up, prepping for the day. Staff moved through the hallways, tending to their routines. But no one knew what was coming. At around 10:30 a.m., a fire broke out on the third floor. Investigators later traced this to a short circuit in the refrigeration unit. But that one spark was enough. Flames quickly caught on to the combustible materials, wood paneling, carpeting, wallpaper, all of which lined the hotel's walls. The building's ventilation system, stairwells, and elevator shafts acted like a chimney, drawing the fire upward with terrifying speed. Within minutes, smoke filled the upper rooms. The power went out, and panic set in. Guests tried to flee, but the hallways were dark, the exits were confusing, and the heat was unbearable. Some people trapped in the rooms smashed windows for air. Others gathered on balconies or the rooftop waving for help. They waited, but help wasn't coming fast enough. Firefighters arrived quickly, but they faced a heartbreaking reality. Their equipment simply wasn't up to the challenge at that time. South Korea's tallest fire truck ladders could only reach the 8th floor, but the majority of people were trapped far above that, on the top floors and the roof. With smoke rising rapidly and fire continuing to spread, those trapped had to make the impossible choice. Some attempted to escape using improvised ropes made from bed sheets. Others wrapped themselves up in towels and jumped from the balcony, hoping to survive the fall. But few did. Dozens of people were seen standing helplessly on the rooftop screaming for help. But there was no helicopter rescue. Not because they weren't requested, but simply because none were available at the time. Some survivors recalled the terrifying moment when the ceiling above them collapsed or when they saw others leaping to their deaths in desperation. In the end, 163 people lost their lives, most from smoke inhalation, and another 63 were seriously injured. The blaze raged for over 6 hours. The destruction was absolute, and the sorrow immeasurable. The aftermath. The fire shocked the nation. For many South Koreans, it was the first time they had seen such a large-scale disaster unfold on such a public stage. News footage of black smoke pouring from the building and the charred bodies being carried out haunted viewers across the country. An investigation followed. However, the findings were quite grim. The building's construction had ignored critical fire safety standards. There were no proper escape routes, the materials used inside were highly flammable, fire drills had never been practiced, and the emergency response system was woefully under-equipped for high-rise rescues. Public anger mounted. Families of victims demanded answers. The government, under intense pressures, promised reforms. This tragedy became a turning point in South Korea's building history towards safety. In the months and years that followed, South Korea introduced sweeping reforms to its building and fire codes. These included mandatory installation of sprinkler systems, fire alarms, fire-resistant construction materials, and clearly marked escape routes in all high-rise buildings. The fire also led to major investments in emergency services, getting better equipment, taller ladders, better trucks, more training, and the eventual development of aerial rescue capabilities. Architects, engineers, and builders were now required to incorporate fire safety into every stage of planning, with new hotels and commercial buildings being rigorously inspected and old buildings being retrofitted. The country had learned a hard lesson, but it was one that would go on to save countless lives in the years ahead. Today, a few people outside of South Korea remember the name Daeonggak. The hotel no longer exists. It was demolished after the fire, replaced in time by other towers and symbols of the city's progress. But to those who study building disasters and to the family of the victims, the Daeonggak Hotel fire remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of urban development. It serves as a solemn reminder that progress without safety is not true progress at all. That beneath every shining skyline, there must be symptoms that protect life and not just celebrate success. And that is all for today's video. Thank you all for watching. If you found this video insightful, do not forget to like and subscribe, and you won't be able to miss out on our next deep dive into another tragic and eye-opening story from the world of architecture and engineering, as well as aircraft investigations and ship sinkings. So, what disaster should we cover next? Let us know in the comment section below. And remember, every building has a story. Some are built to inspire and some to warn.